I'm Clara, and if you had asked me a year ago what my life was like, I would have told you it was pretty ordinary, maybe even predictable. I lived with my mom, Emma, in a small but cozy apartment. She and I were incredibly close. We were like best friends who could talk about almost anything. My mom's been my whole world since I was a kid. My dad passed away when I was too young to remember much about him, so it's always just been the two of us. We've leaned on each other for as long as I can remember, sharing our little inside jokes, late night talks, and movie nights on the worn-out sofa in our living room. There wasn't anything I wouldn't do to keep her happy. Her smile meant everything to me, and seeing her laugh was one of my favorite things. But this story isn't about that simple happiness or about the bond my mom and I shared. It's about what happened when someone entered our lives, turning everything I thought I knew upside down. It's about the day that changed everything for us. The day when Daniel, my dance instructor, became more than just a passing figure in my life. I never would have guessed that he, of all people, would be the reason why my whole world would be shaken to its core. It all began in the familiar Mirrorline dance studio, a place I had come to consider my sanctuary. I'd taken up dancing as an escape, a way to unwind after long, tiring days and a chance to lose myself in the rhythm, where every step felt like it was freeing a weight inside me. In many ways, dancing was more than just a hobby. It was my way of filling those silent gaps, the moments of loneliness that crept in when I least expected them. When I first met Daniel, my instructor, he seemed like the kind of person who made dancing with effortless, every movement flowing like water, and every gesture calm and confident. There was a charm about him, easy, natural, and magnetic, that made people admire him without trying. I wasn't immune to it. I remember watching him from across the room, thinking he was a true artist, someone who lived and breathed the music. I felt lucky, even inspired, to learn from him. But as the weeks passed, things began to shift, though so subtly at first that I wondered if it was all in my head. During our sessions, I noticed his gaze on me, lingering longer than it should, his eyes intense, studying me in a way that went beyond his role as an instructor. His hands, when he guided me, would hold just a little too long, his fingers pressing gently but firmly on my shoulders or hips, lingering in a way that sent an uncomfortable chill through me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading into things that weren't there. Maybe he was just being thorough, I thought, taking his time to help me improve. But then the words began, the compliments, too personal, too focused on things beyond my dancing. He'd say things like, "You have a beautiful grace, Clara," with a softness that felt out of place, his voice lingering in a way that made my stomach twist. Or he'd comment on my smile, my hair, things that had nothing to do with the steps we were practicing. The lines he crossed were subtle but unmistakable, and I felt my initial admiration start to crumble, replaced by a discomfort I couldn't ignore. I started to pull back. I'd show up late for class, hoping that if I missed some time, he'd focus on other students. I stayed close to the group, dancing in corners where I blended in, only speaking up when I had to. When he tried to pull me aside for extra practice or a private chat, I'd make excuses, politely brush him off, hoping he'd take the hint and back away. But every time, his gaze would follow me, his eyes never letting go, as if he were waiting for a different answer, one I would never give. And so, I kept my distance, hoping he'd understand. As the months drifted by, I began to relax, believing I was safe. Daniel hadn't made any more unsettling comments, and I managed to keep my distance without creating any drama. I started to feel a sense of relief, as if I'd finally put the whole thing behind me. I focused on school, my friends, and enjoying the little moments. In my mind, I was done with him, and I wanted to keep it that way. Then, one evening, my mom called me into the living room with a glow in her eyes I hadn't seen in ages. She looked almost like a teenager, her cheeks slightly flushed, her smile warm and genuine. I could tell that whatever she was about to say meant the world to her. She leaned in close, speaking in that low, conspiratorial voice we used when sharing secrets, and told me she'd met someone special. She went on, describing him as if he was the answer to every wish she'd ever made. He was charming, attentive, and kind. she said, someone who truly understood her. I smiled, feeling happy for her, until she said his name. Daniel. The name hit me like a punch in the chest. My heart felt like it stopped and then started racing all at once. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't hide the shock on my face. I wanted to tell her everything, every uncomfortable moment, every stare, every word he'd said that made my skin crawl. But she looked so happy. Her eyes sparkled, her smile so big and real, and I realized I hadn't seen her this joyful in years. A part of me felt angry, felt betrayed that she was falling for the same man who'd made me feel so small, but a bigger part of me didn't want to take away her happiness. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. That's wonderful, Mom. I'm really happy for you, I said, each word feeling heavy. I felt the tension rising in my chest, but I bared it, pushing my unease as deep as I could. Mom deserved happiness, and if Daniel was the one bringing it to her, then maybe I could set my own feelings aside. After that, Daniel became a regular part of our lives. He was around more often, eating dinner with us, helping with little things around the house, and he seemed to make an effort to connect with me. Every time he spoke, he acted perfectly polite, almost brotherly, never giving me a reason to doubt his intentions. He would compliment my mom, laugh at her jokes, and even ask me about school or my friends. Gradually, I started to question myself. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe I just misread his actions before, and he wasn't really the person I thought he was. I wanted to believe in the image he presented, the supportive partner, the man who made my mom laugh again. So, I let my guard down, just a little, just enough to give him a chance. But even as I tried to relax, there was this nagging feeling, a dull, persistent ache in my gut that I couldn't shake, warning me to be careful. Every time he laughed with my mom, his arm around her shoulders, I forced myself to ignore it, brushing it aside as my own paranoia. I told myself, Mom is happy. She's smiling, really smiling, and I hadn't seen that in so long. Her eyes, always tired and distant after years of raising me alone, now sparkled with a light I thought was gone forever. For her sake, I decided I could accept him. I could even try to get along with him, maybe see him as a father figure one day. I thought that maybe if I did this, we could finally be a family again, and that was what really mattered, right? Watching them together, I tried to believe my own words. But deep down, a small part of me couldn't forget the way he used to look at me, the uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't quite explain. Still, I pushed it down, telling myself that I'd be okay as long as Mom was happy. As the months slipped by, I found myself almost believing that everything was normal. Daniel had become a regular part of our lives, and he acted so respectfully, so carefully, that I began to wonder if maybe I'd imagined those early, uncomfortable moments with him. I told myself that he put whatever it was behind him, that I had been overly sensitive, and that, for Mom's sake, I could let my guard down just a little. She was happy, after all, and seeing her glow with excitement felt like reason enough to keep any doubts buried deep. Then came a day that broke through my carefully constructed illusion. Mom had left for a business trip, one of her quick overnight work travels, and I was home alone. She'd mentioned casually that Daniel would stop by to drop off a few things she'd asked him to handle around the house, just some errands he was kind enough to help with, nothing special. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? By then, Daniel and I were on good terms, or so I thought. He'd just drop by, leave what he needed to, and go. Easy. When he arrived that evening, the house was quiet, shadows beginning to stretch across the walls as dusk set in. I opened the door, expecting a quick exchange, but when I saw him standing there, something felt off, like the energy had shifted, heavy and charged. His gaze lingered a moment too long, and his familiar, friendly smile was missing. Instead, his face held a strange, unreadable expression that sent a shiver up my spine. As he stepped inside, I could feel an unsettling tension in the air, a shift that made my heart race and my instincts flare. I forced a smile, acting as normal as possible, and tried to busy myself by talking about Mom's trip, hoping he'd simply drop off what he'd brought and leave. But he didn't. Instead, he moved deeper into the house, almost as if he belonged there. My pulse quickened as he edged closer, his steps slow and deliberate, his gaze piercing, unwavering. I could feel the tension in the air as soon as he stepped into the living room. His usual friendliness was gone, replaced by something darker. He made some small talk, but there was a shift in his tone, a look in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. I tried to brush it off, made excuses to busy myself, but he was persistent. Then he stepped in close, crossing that invisible boundary I had desperately hoped he'd never breach. His eyes had a predatory gleam, and his movements were slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every second. I instinctively tried to back away, but before I could, his hand clamped around my arm, fingers digging in with a force that sent a jolt of pain up to my shoulder. My skin prickled, a shiver of revulsion and fear rippling through me as he pulled me toward him, until his face was just inches from mine. His breath washed over my cheek, warm and sickening, and his eyes held a twisted kind of satisfaction. "No one else is here," he whispered, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. I tried to turn my face away, shaking my head, but his grip tightened, and his other hand found its way to my waist, fingers splaying over me as if he owned me. My heart pounded, and I could barely manage a choked, trembling "no," the word breaking like a whisper as I tried to push him away with all the strength I could summon. But it wasn't enough. His body was like a wall, unyielding and unstoppable. The harder I struggled, the tighter he held me, pressing me against the cold surface of the wall. I could feel the weight of his hand sliding from my waist, roaming, claiming, as he overpowered every last resistance I had. The helplessness was like a wave, crashing over me, stealing my breath, my strength, and my voice. I tried to scream, to fight, but he was stronger, pinning me there, drowning me in a sense of horror so vast I felt I might never breathe again. The hours that followed are a foggy mess in my mind, flashes of tears that left my cheeks raw, my face buried in my hands as I shook with rage and hurt. Every part of me felt fractured, broken in ways I hadn't thought possible. The betrayal was a weight pressing down, suffocating me, the echoes of what he had done lingering like a dark shadow over my soul, a memory I couldn't outrun. The moment I was free, I called the police, my hands shaking as I explained everything, every detail that I could still remember through the haze. The officers arrived quickly, and I saw the look on their faces as they pieced together what had happened. Daniel didn't resist when they took him away. He wore a smirk, almost as if daring me to do something about it. When my mom came home and I told her everything, I watched her face crumble, her happiness shatter like glass. She kept saying she was sorry, over and over, as if any of this had been her fault. But deep down, I knew the only one at fault was Daniel. He'd come into our lives and turned everything upside down. That day, I promised myself something. I promised that no one would ever silence me again. I would never keep my reservations hidden or push my fears aside to protect someone else's happiness. And even though it's a long road to healing, I'll keep moving forward. Because now I know what it's like to lose your voice and what it means to finally find it again.